What's up, everyone? I'm Cole, and you are back on QTV Podcast listening to I Hope This Triggers You. And you know we have our lovely, amazing host with us, Alexander King.
What's goody? What's goody?
So, Lex, what are we triggering people with today?
So today we are going to talk about emotion versus logic.
Ooh.
So I believe that we sometimes forget that emotion and logic are two separate languages, including two separate love languages. If you base your decision upon emotion and I base my decision upon logic, sometimes it just doesn't work out. However, I do feel that there has to be some sort of surrender to meet the other person halfway and talk their language.
Right. I think when it comes to emotion and logic, we really have to start looking at our personal reactions and our innate ability or our habitual responses to stressful situations that happen in our lives. Because I think when things are not stressful, it's so much easier to use logic versus emotion, or to even marry the two to come up with a very balanced decision. But I think when you're in the heat of the moment, it really comes down to those everyday practices that you do really show you what are your habitual reactions to situations. Are you a habitually emotional person? Are you a habitually logical person? I do think that there is a scale, and that, the sweet spot is in the middle, but obviously it's going to be leaning more towards logic when we're in everyday situations.
Absolutely. I think that you made a very great point upon our reaction. How do you react to a certain situation? For me, I'm more of a logical person. However, I'm also an emotional person. So I know me and I know how I react to things. So sometimes I might have to take a second and I'm going to pin through all of my emotional thoughts, even if they're valid or not. I'm going to go through it, and then I'm going to get to the logic. I'm going to boss up and get to the logical part. I found it challenging in relationships. My most previous relationship, I was more of the logical thinker, and she was more of the emotional thinker. And I used, but try to figure out for a long time, like, why can't we connect right now? Like, what is happening? Where's that void? Until I had to figure out that I sometimes was being insensitive because I move upon logic and not giving her the space to let her emotions flow, to then have her come over to the logical side. And that's something that, I work on now because, I can sift through my stuff really quickly. What goes here, what goes there. I can process things and navigate faster than normal, but it's something that I train myself to do. But I have to be mindful that others don't work that way as well, especially in a relationship.
Right. Because if we really break down what emotion is, it is energy in motion, energy literally moving through your body. And a lot of the time, what's happening is we have a lot of these stored vibrations in our body from a lot of these past situations we've been through, past relationships, conversations, things we've watched, things we've seen. And every time a situation happens, we react to it, and our energy starts to move, and whatever emotion you have attached to the situation is the emotion that tends to come out. So I think when we're talking about finding a sweet spot between emotion and logic, it means gaining a little bit of more emotional resilience versus emotional vulnerability. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, the example I like to give is that our body temperatures are always going to be between 97 and 98 degrees. If it's more than that, you're sick. If it's less than that, you're sick. There's something wrong, right? Your internal body temperature has to stay the same. And if you're placed in the desert, even though it's 145 degrees outside, guess what? Your internal body temperature is still going to be 97 and 98 degrees, or there's going to be something wrong. So in saying that, that's just a prime example of how it does not matter what's going on outside of you. It's what's happening inside of you that gives you the control to really navigate and move through your life. Logic gives you the space to find clarity, whereas emotion gets you moving. Emotion is good for passionate situations, but it's not always good for situations where you need to be calm and find clarity, because what we talked about was emotion is energy moving, energy in motion. It does not allow you to be still like logic does to find a clear response to the situation that you're in. So just like the example with the temperature, no matter what's going on around you, you have to maintain that internal regulation, because if not, then something's wrong. Then you're sick. If you're too hot or too cold, your body is out of whack. And you literally start doing things that are going to produce reactions that you're going to have to deal with separate consequences for.
Wow, I
And I
like
think
that.
that a lot of emotional people don't realize that just because you aren't showing an emotion does not mean you don't have one. You know, you get to control how you respond. It does not mean that you're not angry just because you didn't break a window. I can sit here in silence and be irate. It's all how you choose to respond to a situation. But if you give yourself more space to use logic, you have less negative consequences for any situation.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's important. That energy and motion. I never actually thought about it that way. So I'm definitely going to take that away from this conversation. And definitely on that, like what is appropriate and what is not appropriate at the time, like which emotions are appropriate for this conversation and which ones aren't. I think that sometimes, us being human, like we have a hard time tabling something for later. Everything has to be right now and figure it out right now based upon our emotion. And sometimes I don't think that that's fair. I don't think that it's right. And that's where my logic comes into play. How do you, being my friend, would you say that I am more of an emotional person or a logical person?
No, you're definitely more of a logical person.
And would you say that you're more of an emotional person or logical person?
I feel like I'm a
Girl, you
good
better not
like
say 50-50. Go ahead.
no, I'm not 50-50. I would say that if I had to choose, I think I'm like 65 emotion, 35 logic.
I would agree to those numbers. The reason I ask you that question is because I believe that you and I are extremely, we get each other. We understand each other. You can call me and I'm going to hold space. I can call you and you're going to hold space. I think that with you, I think what I've realized is when you have your little 65% of emotion, I usually give you the space to let that all flow out. And but you're very, very aware of your own shit. And that's what I do appreciate about our friendship is that when you do have that emotional space, you're very much so of like, girl, let me just get this out and then we can talk your language after. And I find that to be very, very important. That is something that I actually lack in relationships, of that awareness, of that understanding of, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And I think that you actually do a very, very good job at that. And it's taught me to be a little bit more, a little softer, a little
Because I
softer.
think, growing up, a lot of people, when we think about emotions and when we talk about what's appropriate, a lot of people grew up in our demographic, especially the LGBTQ, we grew up in households where it may not have been okay to just be ourselves. So a lot of our
Absolutely.
initial reactions is what was one, either shutting down, which is also a very emotional response, or two, lashing out, which is an emotional response. But none of it had logic for us to be able to comprehend at those young ages in our life that, these people just don't have the awareness of my being yet.
Absolutely.
But with that, I think that there's a lot of childhood stuff we have to go back into to really dig out. Like, why are we always so overly emotional about things? Because emotions are not bad things to have. We should have emotions. They let us know that we're feeling and we're human. However, the way that we're responding and the way that we're using these emotions are what is causing a lot of turmoil in our lives, because you can very much be balanced and make an emotional and logical decision. But I think what emotion does is when you're only doing an emotion, you start to react rather than respond.
Oh, absolutely. I think that you made a great point when you brought it to childhood trauma. I'm a personal believer that everything comes back to childhood trauma. When it comes to that, I remember being young and I would cry about dumb stuff. Mom's like, "What are you crying for? You have no reason to cry." Da da da. And it really it made me hard. Like I just stopped crying. I stopped crying for a long time. I would get in relationships and they would never see me cry because I didn't cry. And it took me to be in a relationship where I was like, you know what? No, I feel this emotion. I'm gonna let it out. Granted, that person didn't hold great space for that, but it made me understand that that was okay. And because of me being at a young age, the crying or the emotion, it portrayed as weakness, and in reality it really is not that. If you're able to allow your feelings to flow, you're getting closer to who you are as a person, with yourself, with your friends, with your relationships. And now, like, I do like activities to make sure that I'm still in tune with that side of the emotion, because for a long period of time I got away with that. And because I didn't understand the emotion anymore, I no longer could speak someone else's language who wasn't logic.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think it's very important for us to recognize, where these things are stemming from in our lives, because those are the truths that we're here to unfold. But also in saying that, I want to kind of pinpoint that when we are having our emotional responses and things like that, that just because we have emotions, it doesn't make the person that we're being emotional with responsible for them. And that's something
Absolutely.
that we need to learn as people, is that our emotions are our responsibility. Even if you 100% feel like, and everyone in the world can agree with you, that someone else made you feel a certain type of way, how you respond to that feeling is your responsibility, not theirs. And I think a lot of the times what emotion is doing when it's on the negative side, because emotion can be really great when it's on the positive sector, but then we have that shadow side of emotion. And we have the shadow side of emotion that really just wants someone else to see us. That's what really
Mm,
that is that negative emotion. Like, we want you to see us in a way like, give me attention. I don't care what attention it is right now. I just want attention because I feel this way, and you need to acknowledge that I feel this way. No
wow.
matter how you're lashing out and how you're reacting via your emotion, whether it be harsh words or, angry and throwing things, more often than not, it's one, you want attention, and two, you feel like if you can make the other person see this emotion in your like physical manifestation, then they'll understand profoundly what it is that they've done, when more often than not that's not the case. You have to break it down to them logically to understand what they've done, because
Mm.
they can't feel an emotion that's not theirs to feel.
Yeah, you just definitely triggered something for me, with that. You said, you make me feel like this, or you make me do this. And I remember in a relationship, she was, kind of irate, and she looked at me and was like, you see what you're doing to me, look at what you're doing to me. And to me, there was no accountability there. I'm like, how am I doing that to you? And in that space is like, yes, you're in an emotional space right now, but that's the importance of where the logic comes, because now you went from your emotional state to now projection, and you're projecting something onto me that I actually have nothing to do with. That's not my stuff. However, I am your partner. I will help you carry and navigate those things. But to project something so strong of, you make me this person, no one makes you who you are. Your experiences make you who
Right.
you are. You make you who you are. People can
Right.
contribute to it, or they can take from it. But you can't give them that much power. You can't give me enough power to tell you I make you into this person.
Right. No, your emotions have made you into this person. Your reactions have made you into this
Absolutely. Your
person.
traumas have made you into this person.
Right, but there's always an unlearning and an undoing. But even in talking about this, I don't want to just make it seem like having negative outbursts is bad. I think that a more positive way to cope with that, because I'm not one of those airy fairy, let's just be fucking positive all the time, only positive emotions and then logic, right? No, it's perfectly normal to feel negative emotions, but again, that way that you're reacting to them, and that all comes back to finding proper coping mechanisms and support systems to support and hold space for those types of emotions. If you're an angry person, then you need to find, it's no one else's responsibility to find outlets for you to properly process that
Mm,
emotion, because if you don't process it, it's just going to build up inside of you, and that's how you have those really large, outbursts, and those boil overs, and those breaking points. It's because you haven't found a way to properly cope. We're not saying you can't punch, you know, like punch things, like don't punch people, but like you could punch a punching bag. You feel me? Like find a way to really be able to process your negative emotions in a healthy manner, because energy never dies. So if you keep that energy inside of you, it's just going to fester and boil over into other areas of your life. But if you find a positive outlet for that energy, then it can be transformed into something better and
Absolutely.
transmuted into something more positive.
Absolutely. What advice would you give someone who, let's say two people are in a relationship and one person is an emotional person and one person is a logical person, and maybe they're not able to meet in the middle? What advice would you give them on maybe some things or tricks to do or activities to do for them to meet in the middle?
One of the very first things that I would give them to do would be to go a full week, and anytime they think that a person's being too logical or too emotional, write it down and keep an actual log of it. Because being able to see where you guys are having those differences makes it easier to really work them out. Because if it's all just he say, she say, and you only bring it up when you're in the heat of an argument, nothing can ever get solved because you guys are already in the thick of the thick of the situation. So my biggest advice to couples or partnerships, friendships in general, is always try and deal with situations when you're not in a negative space, because it makes it so much easier to really unravel them and really get down to the root of the issue. So one thing I would do is write down the things that are nuances, the things that you think are too logical or too emotional, so you guys can really start to dissect those. The next advice I would give is, if you have someone that's too logical versus too emotional, is start to work on your own habits, your individual habits. So the person that's very logical should start to do habits that get them more in tune with
I
their
love that.
emotions. And a lot of times for people that are too logical, it does go back again to childhood trauma. So go back to that one time in childhood trauma, because I can almost guarantee you every time, go back to that one time in childhood that you felt like somebody did you so wrong, and it was probably an authoritative figure that made you shut down and choose to only think about things logically.
Wow. Yeah, I like that. I like that.
And if you can go back to that moment, you can start to unweave that truth that you formed around that situation that is not true for you
Absolutely. I
anymore.
think what's important too is, in addition to those things, is removing the ego and having the willingness. Sometimes we want to be with a partner, but we don't actually want them to see us. We want them to have this idea of who we are. And when we get into these heated moments, though, that's the most important moment where you have to decide to let that ego go so that you can meet your partner there. You have to have that willingness to understand who they are as a lover and a person, and who you are as a lover and person. And honestly, just check yourself. Like, I know that I'm being emotional right now. What is something I can do to just shift that narrative and meet my partner halfway? And if you're doing that and you have security in your relationship and your partner's on the other side saying, I know I'm being too logical right now, what can I do to shift that towards being a little bit more emotional to understanding my partner? Guess what? You guys just met in the middle. You went from having two separate languages to now communicating on the same realm. I think that's extremely important. And a lot of times when we're so angered and, you feel like when you're angry, you feel that shit physically. You feel it physically. And
Mm-hmm.
we forget to like just relax for a second. It's okay. You're with this person because you see something in them. You're investing in them. So why is it when we get to hard times, you no longer see that? You no longer want to invest in that. And if that's the case, you shouldn't be in a relationship. You don't have the willingness. You're not willing to
Right.
let the ego go. You should not be in a relationship with that person, because all you're doing is holding them back as well as not moving yourself forward.
Right. Absolutely. And I think for people that are too over emotional, my advice for you would be to write down all the stories you tell yourself. Because I told you guys, my scale tips more towards the emotional side, and I'm very empathetic. But also it's because of a lot of stories. stories I tell myself, stories I make up, stories, about life and about my relation to life and its relation to me is what causes me to be more emotional, because I'm looking at life at what I want it to be rather than what it
Oh,
is
absolutely.
sometimes.
I'm very glad you said that.
And I think that is very huge. So if you feel like you tend to be an over emotional person, look at the stories you create around your life, and make sure that the stories that you're creating are actually true, and they're actually what is, and not what you want it to be. Because when we start to look at things for what we want them to be, then we miss the beauty of what they are.
Absolutely. I think that comes with how we want to portray ourselves and our relationships as well. Along with that aesthetic that we talked about in the last episode, we want things to look a certain way. But to be honest, it's like this is what I don't, I do not like when there are couples who are like, yeah, we never argue. We're never, are on different pages. And in reality, it's like, okay, well, how much work are you actually doing as a couple to sustain long term if you're not getting into those spaces?
Right.
Because those spaces are going to teach you so much about your relationship. They're going to teach you so much about yourself, as opposed to something looking so perfect on the outside.
Right. And when we think of relationships, it should be like everything else in life. It's like it's a cycle. Not to say that you're supposed to cycle out of your relationship, but you guys should cycle out of, the personalities, and grow into more of your whole selves while you're
Mm-hmm.
together. And with that, I think that it's a good way to acknowledge that everything is on the same wave, as in like there's an ebb and flow. So nothing can just always be up, and it's not going to always be down. There has to be some type of like up down motion, kind of like if we're looking at, like a heartbeat, right? If it's a flat line and it's just going straight, it's dead. There's nothing, there's no growth, there's no peak, there's no end, there's no nothing. But a heartbeat that is healthy, you see it spiking up
Absolutely.
and down and up and down and up and down. Roller coasters are exciting because you go up and down and up and down. Life is exciting, even though sometimes tumultuous, because there's an up and a down and an up and a down. So you can really start to learn the lessons and implement them and grow, and then learn more lessons and implement them and grow. And that's the same way a relationship should be. But also in that is you shouldn't, I feel like you shouldn't be more like too logical or too emotional, but a good way to be is just to find that
Mm-hmm.
sweet spot, and it's going to be different for everybody. So don't go into it expecting it to look a certain way, like, oh my god, okay, my emotion and my logic needs to look like this. Be open to what it is for the relationship and for the situation that's at hand, because you might be in a situation that calls for more emotion than logic, or vice versa, more logic than emotion. But that's where that just being in alignment and in tune with yourself and asking yourself actual questions comes to play, so you can really decipher how to maneuver in your own life.
Absolutely. And just to clarify for the listeners, when we say relationships, we are not just talking sexual relationships and people that we are dating. We are also talking about friendships. I think that we have to be mindful of how we should use, when we use the term relationship, be more open to it, as like friendships. And that you mentioned something about being a balance. I'm a strong believer that this world we survive off balance. What comes in, what goes out. And with that being said, I know that my most successful relationships, whether it be friendships, whether it be a person I'm intimately engaged with, for me, I need that balance. I cannot date another completely logical person. Like there would be no
Mm-hmm.
emotion and no passion in that. And at the same time, I would not be able to date an only emotional person, because I'm not only logical. I also have emotion as well. So I think that that balance is extremely important, and it's also important in my friendships. All of my friends, they have that. They have the balance of both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's a great, you know, line to end this episode on. I think we've given you guys a lot of information, a lot of questions to ask yourself, to ponder with yourself. Send us a DM on at Queerious TV on Instagram, and let us know, do you feel like you're more emotional based or logic based? And how has that been working out for you guys? We would love to hear from you, and also let us know if there's any other episodes you guys would like to hear, any questions you have.
Thanks so much for listening, guys, and I do hope you are triggered. You can find me on social media at I am Cole Lawson, UYEAMCOLELAWSON.
Thank you for listening. Check me out on social media platforms at I am Alexander King, and we'll see you next week.